Hey everybody, thanks for checking out this video. The title of the video, what we're going to talk about today, is the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's been 30 years and it's still collapsing. And it's not peaceful. What we're talking, I've always been at my age, I was a Cold War kid, man. I grew up in the 80s. I've always been fascinated by the Soviet Union. Some of my favorite writers are from the Soviet Union, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky. They have a very unique culture. I've read of several books on Eurasianism by Alexander Dugin. Kind of gives you a really good insight into what the Kremlin and the Russians think. As a people, they have a great capacity for suffering. Their history books, there's a joke, they have chapters that always start with, and then it got worse. Fascinating history, and sad times obviously with this Ukrainian war. But it's interesting. We'll take back in this video. What we're going to do is we're going to look back at the collapse of the Soviet Union, where it was peaceful and where it was not. And what we'll see is that basically what we're living through right now is just the continued collapse of the Soviet Union around ethnic and linguistic lines. That's what's going on. The eastern half of Ukraine is Russian speaking, including Crimea, and they don't want to be part of Ukraine. And the Ukrainians are more Ukrainian today thanks to this war than they've ever been. They're completely solidified as Ukrainians. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And maybe is that a way to finally solve this? Is that territory may have to be conceded in the Russian-speaking areas. The Ukrainians go their way and the Russians go the other way and end this thing. But let me take you back to 1991. The Soviet Union's collapsing. Even Mikhail Gorbachev didn't understand the collapse was coming. The reason why was the Soviet Union itself was really the last of the large multi-ethnic empires to collapse. And that was 1991. You go back into the rest of the 20th century, you saw the dissolution of all large, great empires. British Empire, German Empire, French Empire, Austro-Hungarian, Japanese. Everybody had empire dissolve except the Soviet Union. And these empires were all large, multi-ethnic states with multiple territories, with one host nationality and one great capital city. Vienna, Paris, London, Moscow. And Moscow's was the last to fall, and it's still falling. And it's not peaceful, as I mentioned. So we have a view in the West that it largely was peaceful. Everyone was surprised in 1991. The year I graduated high school is when the wall fell and the Iron Curtain left, and then the Soviet Union quickly followed and went their separate ways. It was largely peaceful. So Czech Republic became Slovak and Czech. Poland had a lot of labor union protests, and they just left. And then one day the wall broke, and Hungarians started moving, so everyone separated. The only area that had real problems was Yugoslavia, and you guys know that story. I'll probably do some videos. I'll actually be in Belgrade this summer, so I'll do some videos about that area as well. Romania, Ceausescu, the leader, was chased down and shot. So, but other than that, Romania had largely a peaceful transition. That's outside the USSR. Inside the USSR, however, was a different story. You had two Chechen wars. You had the Armenian and the Azerbaijani conflicts, which are still going on. They're still fighting. They just had a war last year. That could kick back at any time. It's a very tense situation. You had troops. Gorbachev put troops in the Baltic states immediately. They were some of the first that wanted to get out. And then you had Ukraine. So Ukraine was largely a peaceful setup, a peaceful split. However, it's reared its ugly head again now with this war. So that's what happened in 1991. You saw it was the end. It wasn't the end of communism. It was the end of the multi-ethnic large empires. It was also the end of economies that didn't value private property. So even China went to private property and market capitalism. Politically, absolutely, it stays communist, but economically, China is a market economy, in many ways much more competitive than the United States in terms of capitalism. Um, Russia went fully 100% into capitalism, which was a very big mistake because they destroyed the old supply chains what existed, but there were nothing new to take its place. I remember I even did a course on my undergraduate about the post collapse of the Soviet Union, and went into we did a whole textbook on it. It's quite interesting. But at the end of the day, it gets back to incentive systems. So the incentive systems were never right in the Soviet Union. Created consumer shortages. They couldn't put anything on the table. They couldn't move fast enough in the economy to deal with the complexities of the economy, and that's why the free market capitalism works so well. I mean, you look at the Koreas, same race of people, same language. One has the most advanced semiconductor production in the world. Go 40 miles north, they don't have indoor plumbing. East Germany, West Germany, same situation. We really put economic systems in the laboratory of the world to see what works better. Now, that doesn't mean today's capitalism doesn't have problems, because it does. We don't actually live in capitalism. We live in various forms of socialism. And most of the times the governments completely gum up the gearworks of our economy. But that's a whole other subject we could talk about. But the Soviet Union, going back to this issue in Ukraine, Kissinger's come out last week and he said they're going to have to discuss giving up territory. And people are shocked. They're appalled by it. But at the end of the day, if they're Russian-speaking people and they're Russians and they want to be part of Russia, what gives Ukraine the right to lord over them? Why are we going to spend billions of dollars and lose millions of people in a war trying to put Russians under Ukrainian rule? It hasn't worked out. Since the Maidan movement of 2014 in the Ukraine, which the U.S. was absolutely involved in, and to help create that, since that time, there has been an open civil war going on in that country, and they've killed 14,000 people in the Donbass regions. So we're now entering the end of the phase 2 of the war. Russia has been grinding out a victory. I think the Ukraine is going to be very tough to take more territory, especially once heavy weapons get in. Their issue now is they still are flying sorties. They don't have much of an air force left. They don't have the Russians are basically grinding this out. They're sending in, missile barrage attack, air attacks, and then they're coming in and sweeping up with ground forces. They're not losing a lot of casualties compared to the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have admitted they're losing a battalion a day, so probably 1,500 soldiers a day. My estimate since the beginning of the war, they may have lost close to 50,000 soldiers by now, which is an absolute disaster. The Russians, on the other hand, took most of their casualties at the beginning of the war. They may be 5,000 or so casualties right now. All in all, it's a disaster. We have the port of Odessa is been mined by the Ukrainians. None of the Ukrainian wheat can get out, and I think they're going to hold it as hostage to try to get more help. The emerging markets, North Africa, Egypt in particular, perhaps Indonesia, these areas are going to be looking at food shortages not far off. We're talking months. So this is going to get completely out of hand. You've already seen prices all over the world. The oil markets are a different one. I'll probably do a whole different video on the oil market. The common concept is stop buying the Russian oil, stop getting Putin to pay for stop paying Putin for this war. It's kind of insanity. I think there's a lot of the laptop class of the European politicians, the American politicians, that don't really know how things get done. So a lot of this oil today is coming seaborne on small ships from St. Petersburg area into Estonia. That gets all cut off. The ships don't exist to bring Middle Eastern oil or American oil into Europe. The LNG terminals don't exist yet. You can't just switch this oil and energy map that's been building for 30 to 40 years or longer. You can't just switch it overnight. So Europe's going to be forced. They've got to continue to use Russian oil for the time being. They're an $18 trillion economy. So, yes, Putin's getting $1 billion a day. However, if you bring an $18 trillion economy to its knees, you're doing yourself more harm than good. So this could be a very long war. Europe's not gonna win a war by decimating their economy. And it's not just about prices for people, which have already been fell. I mean, German inflation's up over 23% year over year. It's not just about that, it's about factories. Factories are not going to be able to compete. So factories run off electricity, and electricity usually and they run off gas. So they get their electricity from gas, and that's the lowest outside of nuclear. It's one of the lowest forms of energy. So I believe 90% of the German automotive industry is based off natural gas. So without the gas, the plants stop. You don't have an economy. Nobody's working. So you're going to decimate your own economy to the tune of much, much more than Putin was ever going to get in oil revenues. So they got to think real economy. You got to think long term. And if they want to beat Putin, they're going to have to keep their economy rolling. So back to this Odessa thing, it's been mined. The port's been mined. The Turks have offered to come help clear it. The wheat and the grains out of Russia and Ukraine have got to get to market, and that's got to happen soon, or we're going to have a global calamity on our hands that we haven't seen since World War II. Basically, we're going to have more people die this year than we've seen in 70, 80 years. So, yeah, that's it. That's kind of an upgrade on the Soviet Union. We're still under the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's not peaceful. Never thought we'd be back here. As a Cold War kid, I always thought that was over back then, but it really hasn't changed much. And until we sort all this out, the world will be unstable. So hopefully, we have not had a lot of diplomacy so far since this war broke out. It's mainly been to rush weapons into the battle space. So hopefully, we get some real diplomats emerge out of this contest, and we get a conclusion soon. But it doesn't look likely. It could last for a very, very long time. And that's it for today. We'll see you in the next video. Cheers.